Hope I get him.
Yeah, I'm
Apologies,
here.
sir. Apologies,
No,
sir.
I don't know
Apologies.
who should apologize because it's entirely possible it's my
Me. No, it's
Sarkari
me.
internet as well.
No, always the host apologizes. So I'm sorry.
You're a good host, Sunil.
Thank you. So to begin with, I have seen pictures of you at stadiums. You have never seen one of me at a literary fest.
That's
Just so
true.
we know, yeah, just so that we know who is going to be outside his comfort zone throughout the conversation. Just want to make it clear.
Listen,
And
I'm
also,
the guy
sir,
who's
yeah,
hugely awestruck to be talking to the Indian football captain, who is second in the list of world's goal scorers after Ronaldo and ahead of Messi. I mean, we're talking serious stuff here, Sunil Chetri. I'm the one who's got to be grateful to be with you.
thank you so much, sir. So why? I mean, it's not about me, of course, it's about you today. Why I'm saying this is because, sir, we worked really hard on 11 on 10 series. And the hard work is about research and making sure we get 10 questions that the guest generally doesn't answer.
Okay, right.
But with you, there's an added pressure from someone called Kunal, who is in my team, who's a big fan of you. He told me, do not make grammatical errors or mistakes in sentence formation and do not embarrass us. And I told him that I'm just a sports person and I make many mistakes and probably I'll do that today also. But before I ask for his apology, if you do hear all those mistakes, please pardon me, sir.
I'm simply won't be an issue, Sunil, because I'm not an English teacher. As long as I understand what you're after, I'll try and respond satisfactorily.
You ready, sir? Should we start?
Yes, sure.
Okay. So my first question to you is, sir, I have recently taken up reading regularly. I like it more. I like it more than what I thought I would. Yeah, it is. And I think I saw an interview of Bill Gates where he's talking about reading habits. He talks about keeping notes in the margin, not picking up books that you know you're not going to finish, taking out 1 hour every day, dedicate it to just reading. I want to know how does Shashi Tharoor gets it reading? What is the way? What is the system? How does he go about it?
Well, there are two different kinds of reading that I end up doing, Sunil. There's reading purely for pleasure, where I put my, I sit back in a very comfortable chair that actually has a built-in massager in it. And I turn the button on and I vibrate along and I put my book up and I recline and I read and I forget the world. That's one kind of reading. But the other kind of reading, and I have to say in recent years, that's what I've been doing more of, is reading with a view to doing research for books I'm writing. And there I'm reading at a desk on a laptop. In fact, very often the book itself is on my drive.
Okay.
And I'm taking notes from it because I need to refer to those notes when I'm writing what I'm writing. So for a book like Era of Darkness on the British Empire here, published in the West as Inglorious Empire, or the current book I'm writing on Indian nationalism, which requires a lot of sources on the nationalism part. On India, I think I'm pretty okay. But when it comes to all the theoretical work that's been done on nationalism, there's so much of other stuff to read. And you need to quote them accurately, so you need to read and take notes. So two kinds of reading. I would say that kind of note-taking reading is certainly a more focused reading because you're trying to get something specific, extracting something from it. Whereas the kind of other reading I described is purely for pleasure, where you just want enjoyment. You don't have to remember what you read. You just have to remember whether you liked it.
But even there, do you know what books are going to pick up, or you just randomly pick anything that is there when it comes to pleasure reading?
I have very eclectic tastes, Sunil. That is that I don't focus only on one kind of genre. It depends on my mood. So I do enjoy both fiction and non-fiction. In non-fiction, I'm particularly partial to history and politics, and political history in particular combines both. In fiction, again, I have a wide range of tastes between the sort of what one might consider the literary giants, Garcia Marquez, Salman Rushdie. When their books come out, of course, Garcia Marquez has now passed away, but books of that quality come out, then I would happy to read them. But equally, I enjoy light diversion. I was a huge fan of P.G. Woodhouse's. I would still consider that, but
Yes.
since I've read every single P.G. Woodhouse, there's no point rereading Life is Too Short. At least not until there's an emergency or something that I may have to turn back to my collection of Woodhouses. But otherwise, not long ago, in fact, over Christmas, I read a new novel written in the Woodhouse style. That is, the Woodhouse estate has licensed new writers to imitate Woodhouse in writing an additional Woodhouse novel. And that's the one that I found myself reading by a writer called Sebastian Faulks, who's a well-known British writer. So you've got that kind of thing that comes up. There's no question in my mind that pleasure is also fun. For example, there's a hilarious Swedish novel, which I recommend to everybody who wants a good laugh. And at the same time, interested in the broader world. It's by Jonas Jonsson. That's with a J in both cases. Jonas Jonsson. It's called The 100-Year-Old Man Who Stepped Out of a Window and Disappeared. That's the entire title of the book. And it's hilarious. Here is this character who walks into all the main historical events of the 20th century in a zany plot involving stolen money, corpses turning up anywhere, twists and turns that are hilarious. The whole thing is brilliantly written, and I haven't had so much fun since Woodhouse died. Now, I was talking about this book, including on some of my book recommendations during the lockdown, and then a friend said, did you know there was a sequel? And I didn't. And so I received as a gift, as soon as the postal services began, I received as a gift the sequel, which is Further Accidental Adventures of the 100-Year-Old Man. So when my book that I'm writing is finished, I'm going to settle down to that and have myself some pleasure.
Lovely. So, sir, when you read so many books and get inspired by so many writers, do you sometimes feel you are influenced in your own writing also by some of the ones that you are a fan of or you love reading?
No, I've been asked that, and I find this slightly strange because, to be very honest, I think of writing as something as instinctive to the individual as the way you speak, the way you walk, the way you kick a ball. It's simply the way you are. Now, of course, you can be trained up to a point, but you can't, just as you can't train a cow to bark, you can't train somebody who doesn't have writing talent to write. And if they write, they will write in the way that they can write. So, yes, you can write imitatively. I have very deliberately and consciously, for example, published a short story in my collection, The $5 Smile, which was an attempt, and I say so in the book, to imitate Woodhouse's style in an Indian setting, just for one short story. But that doesn't mean that is my natural style. That's a very conscious imitation, just like this guy. In fact, it wasn't Sebastian Faulks, as another writer. I'm trying to remember his name now. The fellow who wrote the new Woodhouse book that came out last year. He was trying very consciously to write like Woodhouse, not like himself. And that sort of thing is what you can imitate. But if you're writing for yourself, it seems to me you have absolutely very little choice about the way you write, just as you have very little choice about the way you speak or the way you breathe or the way you swim or the way you walk. I mean, these are instinctive things that are part of who you are.
Yeah, so you can learn bits and pieces from here and there, but your style would be your style.
Exactly. That's my view anyway. It may not be the universal view among other writers, but it's certainly
But it makes sense in other parts also. Even if in sports, you can go and look up to people that play in a certain way. You can be a fan, but eventually what you play and the way you play would always be individual. Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's just as your football, you've seen, I'm sure, lots of football around the world. But your football is you. It's what your body, your upbringing, your experience, your training, everything makes you do. You can't suddenly be somebody else. You have to be yourself. And the same thing applies to writers. Yes, you can admire a Garcia Marquez, but you can't be him. Therefore, you can't exactly write like him.
True. That makes sense. That's a good. All right, sir. My next question to you is, so in my sports, if I see a kid with a ball, for a bit, I can probably say or tell whether he or she is cut for the sports professionally. The touch, the awareness, the way they pick a pass, the desire and the hunger. But politics is no football pitch. What are the traits that determine somebody is going to be a good politician? Are there any traits that you can follow? And I'm asking you this, sir, because there is no I don't know about any blueprint. I don't see any blueprints. So what, according to you, are the...
See, there are no blueprints also because there is no such thing as a standard idea of good from other politicians, and they're good in their own way. So I have found in my own experience that what I admire in a good politician is somebody who, first of all, is a good listener, somebody with good people skills, somebody who can motivate staff, a team, campaigners, etc. But somebody who at the same time has some intellectual equipment to understand issues, to have a vision about those issues, to respond decisively to the problems arising from those issues, and who can communicate his understanding and the way forward to the public. Now, you could argue there are very few politicians in our country who do all of that. And certainly, you would say that Narendra Modi is a successful politician in his own way. Sharad Pawar is a successful politician. And Mamata Banerjee is a successful politician. And yet they're all so different from each other.
True.
So you can't say there is one template. I think a lot depends on individual temperament. A lot depends on your particular constituency as well. A style of politics that sells very well in Bengal may not sell very well in Bangalore. And equally, something that is effective in campaigning in Darjeeling may not be what people are looking for in Delhi. So it seems to me that also helps govern your effectiveness. Now, the other thing about politics is you've got to be a good learner. Because no one starts off, I think, being the perfect politician. I'm certainly not aware of it. Even those who were born to politics, the so-called dynasts, the people whose fathers or elder relatives had a whole history, a vote bank, their own staff of campaigners, everything else. Even those, I must say, are people who, at the beginning, were uncertain, were diffident, had to learn their way, had to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes, had to correct themselves. Look at someone like Indira Gandhi. She became prime minister. Then she had a setback in an election. Then she changed her leadership style. She split her party. She became prime minister again. She declared the emergency. She lost an election. Again, she had to learn the lessons from that, come back, try again. So each time, politics, I would say, is a sustained purpose of a sustained exercise of self-renewal, of renewing yourself, of learning from your mistakes, of correcting yourself and growing with it. Certainly, without much immodesty, I can say I'm a better politician today than I was in my first year in politics, when I was in many ways like a deer in the headlights. I didn't know what was going on, why people were attacking me, why I was being sort of repeatedly stabbed in the back, as well as in the front. So I was totally mystified. And I'm sure many of those who were attacking me must have thought I was going to run away because this was not my world. But I said, no, I've stepped into it. I must make a real effort to do something here. And I have decided to take it on, stick to it, take the lumps, and bear the scars and carry on. And that's essentially what I did. As a result, I got better. So politics is certainly a profession where you do, I think, better simply by doing and learning from your setbacks.
So you get into it and then you learn and then you become better. And you gave us so many traits of being versatile, of being a good leader, of being a good listener, someone who's going to reinvent himself or herself. Where does the knowing of the constitution and the rules and regulation come up? Like what?
So as I mentioned, somebody must have the intellectual equipment to understand the issues. That starts with a basic grounding in our democracy. What is the constitution? What is our system in the particular job that you're trying to do, whether it's a local panchayat level, municipal level, MLA or assembly level, state level, central level, parliament level. You must understand what are the roles of that level that are appropriate under the constitution. You must do your homework, read and understand the rules of the institution you belong to, the assembly, whatever, the party. At the same time, you have to be somebody with a sense of some political history. You need to understand what your party stands for, has stood for, where you differ from those who are in power if you're not in power, or where you differ from those who are in the opposition if you are in power. You have to have a good sense of also why you differ, what the logic is of the positions you take. So that intellectual equipment that I mentioned includes all of this. And certainly I would believe that you to be motivated by something other than self-interest. I know there are some people in politics who are only there because they see it as a means of self-advancement. I think that's a great shame. I think if all you want is to make money or whatever, you should go into banking or or some profession where that's the purpose of the profession. Politics is ultimately about service, and particularly service to society. And every one of us in electoral politics is serving people, a majority of whom live below the World Bank poverty line of $2 a day.
True.
That's 150 rupees a day. Many Indians can't take for granted. So our entire logic of what work we're doing and the money we're spending or the money we are dedicating from taxpayer funds must be of what can I do that is needed by the vast majority of the poor in our country. Mahatma Gandhi gave us a great piece of advice. He said, when you're contemplating a policy decision, think of how it will impact who's the weakest, poorest, oldest, most fragile person you've seen. Imagine that person ask, how will it affect them? And that would be ultimately the test of the right policy, whether they're doing it or not. So to my mind, those things have to be borne in mind. I certainly don't think that there's any real way of people to honestly make money in politics. Unfortunately, the only way people make money is dishonest. Because honestly, your salary is very modest. Even an MP or a minister, despite all the perks that the middle class objects to them getting, earns much less than they have to spend. So they actually have to supplement their official income, ideally by honest means, either through a law practice or writing articles as I do, or whatever else other businesses they may have, in order to supplement their official income to be able to make an impact. Otherwise, how do you, for example, run an office in Delhi and in your constituency, run cars in both places, pay staff in both places, have expenses in both places, electricity bills and phone bills in both places? You can't do it on the basis of pays you, which is a princely sum of 50,000 rupees a month and 50,000 in other allowances. You just can't do it.
Okay, that's a lot of knowledge. That's a lot of knowledge for a lot of youngsters who want to be politicians. It's just not one skill or one thing that you can have, but a lot of different stuff that you need to think that you can be a good politician.
Right.
All right. Let me jump to my third question, sir.
Sure.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, sir, but you have a little bit of London, Bombay, Delhi, Calcutta, Massachusetts, Singapore, and more in you. It
and
also
Kerala,
meant that, of course, I said more. Yeah, Kerala, of course, the most important one. It meant that you were growing up as a citizen of the world. It also meant, I'm sure, that you learned so much culturally. Which cities do you remember fondly? What are the cities that gave you so much as to what and who you have become today? And how do you think traveling so much helps you to become a better person?
Well, I mean, I must say that I feel, looking back, thanks to the lockdown, where I've had a very unaccustomed stability and stuck in one place for 2 months, I actually feel I've been traveling too much. I think in many ways, there's a lot to be said for being in one place and getting into the rhythms of life that other human beings enjoy. And I must say, I kind of regret the fact that I'm constantly dashing, or as we like to say in India, air dashing from place to place all the time. I think I discovered that from the 3rd of January to the 1st of February, when Parliament convened, I had been to 13 different cities for speeches, conferences, events, literary festivals, all of that. And that's really quite insane. I really, looking back, think I should not have done that. So in some ways, I think it'll teach me to slow down a bit. But answering your question, I don't have negative feelings about any place particularly. I think some places have pros and cons like other places do. So, for example, I spent the longest stint I spent in one city, though I was again traveling a lot, was in New York, where I was based for 18 years with the United Nations. And the pros are, it's a wonderful city. It's the most cosmopolitan city on earth. Every single nationality on earth is represented there. There are languages spoken in New York that have died out in their country of origin. There are newspapers being published in New York in languages that have died in their country of origin. It's quite remarkable. And similarly, every cuisine on earth has a restaurant or several in New York. All of that's great. It's a great walking city. You can walk around from place to place and so on. On the negative side, it's an expensive city. Space is at a premium. You can only afford a tiny place to live if you're a salaried professional. You usually can't afford to maintain a car because having a garage to park your car in will be like having a second apartment. All of these things become a disincentive by comparison. So it's a better place to visit as a tourist, spend a week or two, see some plays, go to some restaurants, go to some art galleries, museums, walk around, have a great time. But if you have to try and cope with the stresses of living in New York, it's no longer such a great thing. London, I find two things objectionable about London. One is the distances are insane. It's quite common for people to take an hour and a half to get from point A to point B.
True.
And I find that utterly reprehensible and a waste of time. And the second thing is the climate. My God, they have the worst climate in the world. I began theorizing that I could understand British colonialism, that they had to go abroad and conquer places where the sun shone. Because you can't see the sun shining in London. When my sister who lives there says, oh, I had a good summer, I would say, oh, was it on a Sunday today, this year? Because they were 1 day summer or a 2 day summer is all they get. A terrible place. So again, pros and cons. But again, it's a culturally rich place, lots of theatre, bookshops, and lots of interesting activities. But rather too spread out for my taste, unlike Manhattan, New York. And so on and so forth. You can say pluses and minuses. Calcutta, for example. What a wonderfully warm city, a place of tremendous humanity, throbbing culture. It's so easy to feel embraced by the city and feel you belong. But at the same time, tremendous poverty, tremendous congestion, tremendous pollution, all of those challenges. So each place you can say good and bad about it. I would say that each of them has affected me, each of them has marked me. Today, I would tell you that the place that I feel the fondest for and the one I'm most likely to settle down in permanently would be my own constituency of Thiruvananthapuram. And I'm not saying it to ask for votes because I don't think voters will care one way or the other as long as I deliver what they expect. But I think Thiruvananthapuram has all the merits of a city, including airport, railway station, good highways, good infrastructure, including electricity and Wi-Fi, while at the same time it has some of the advantages of the rural areas that surround it, including a lot of natural beauty. The sea is nearby, beaches are nearby, forests are nearby. You can get out quickly into the countryside. You can have a breathable life as well as be in a city where nothing is too far away, traffic is relatively manageable, etc. Some of the pluses and minuses of both are available in Thiruvananthapuram, and that's why it's my favorite.
But on a whole, wouldn't you say that traveling is definitely one of the best things if one can do, to go to a different place and see the different culture, meet different people, understand their language, the way of life? Wouldn't you say that? Like I always say this in my whatever life that I've lived till now, traveling has taught me the most. When I travel to a different country, play matches there.
I see what you're saying, because you've actually been to everywhere from Kansas City to London for Queen's Park Rangers. So I'm sure that you've actually done a fair bit of traveling yourself. And I will say that there's a lot to be said for traveling. It expands your horizons. It shows you. But where I think you score and I don't is you always have a sense of home to return to. So you have a frame of reference. You grew up in a particular place, you feel rooted and anchored in a place. My problem is, when that wonderful Bengali song by D.L. Rai, Hey Deshete, John Mojano, Hey Deshete Mori. But Hey Deshete for me was London that my John Mo took place. And I certainly don't want to go and die there. So, I have been too mobile. It has frustrated me. The number of things I've lost with each move from house to house, books lost, items lost, precious souvenirs lost. It's frustrated me that most of my adult life, I've never known whether I would be in that particular place I'm living in 2 or 3 years down the road, or whether the UN would transfer me somewhere, or in politics, whether my election would end in a particular way, or whatever. There's never been that sense of stability that comes with a sense of place. So I actually have become more and more attached to the idea of having a permanent home, a permanent address, which I've never really had all my life. Even today, my main address is a Sarkari bungalow, which is there because of the generosity of the voters of Thiruvananthapuram who elected me. If tomorrow they decide that having appointed me, it's time to disappoint me, I have to go find somewhere else to live. So that's the difference.
I understand what you mean.
Travel is great if you always have a sense of home and roots to come back to.
I understand what you're saying. And it makes sense. All right, sir. Now shifting to the next one. At 22, you were the youngest to receive a doctorate in the history of literature school. Right. I think it was for international relations and affairs, if I'm not wrong.
But all the doctorates are in international affairs, one aspect or the other of it. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm purely banking on the fact that you were armed with a PhD at 22 when I ask you this. If you were given a chance, what different would you do with the education system in our country? Do you think that there is a visible lack of a more holistic approach from real class 1 or class 2?
No, listen, I have to say, Sunil, that this is a vast subject. I have actually written and spoken about this so much, we could take up the rest of our hour just talking about education. That wouldn't be fair. Let me just say that there are 2 or 3 things. First of all, in the school levels, there are, I think, 2 specific things I would most emphasize. One is we should stop focusing so much on mugging up things for examinations. I think there's got to be much more emphasis on creative thinking, on original thinking, than on memorization and rote learning, particularly in the 21st century. We're living in the information age. If in the world you have to look up something, you can find it with 2 clicks of the mouse. You don't actually need to remember it word for word or fact for fact or number for number. What you do need is therefore not a well-filled mind. You need a well-formed mind. True. A mind that is able to look at unfamiliar facts and figures, understand them, come to conclusions about how to approach them, even if you haven't seen them in the examinations last year. Because life, the big exam called life, keeps asking questions you couldn't prepare for from a textbook anyway. And that's what our education system doesn't do enough to prepare our kids for. The second thing is in the way in which we teach. I keep saying to teachers when I address them, please don't teach children what to think. Teach children how to think. Because that how to think is ultimately what's going to equip them in life. We are far too focused on the process of learning, not enough on the outcomes. True. So it's not about saying, have you mugged up this textbook or done this assignment or prepared this Q&A, because tomorrow some other question may come, right? It's more about how have you thought. And so those are the 2 main things about school education. On college education, I would say that the system is over-regulated and under-governed. That is that we have, for example, like UGC will tell universities everything from how many classrooms they should have, what size they should be, what should be in the syllabus, what books can be prescribed, how many years the degree should be, etc. And that's not anymore the way in which modern education systems work. In colleges, you ought to free them to offer the kind of education that they believe people need, and then the market will help decide. Students will come to places where actually they feel they're gaining something. They won't go to places where it's just pointless. Ultimately, these external details are not what should really govern a good and effective education. The effective education is what works for the student, and it will vary from student to student. So why can't you let different universities offer different things? Why should you have a one-size-fits-all regulatory approach?
Yeah, so I totally agree. And I'll tell you why I asked you this, sir, because when I was young, and in football, the more early you start, the better the chances of you becoming a professional. So a lot of kids come to me and ask that, should we only play because our parents want us to study also? And I had the same problem. So when you are in class, let's say 6th, 7th, and I do understand you need basic education, but then in class 7, I only had 2 periods in the whole week to play football. There was no theory. There were no teachers coming to me and talking about football on a blackboard and teaching me what to do, what move to do. And I also think that I'm always lagging behind from someone who wants to be an engineer, because he has got what, 18 classes a week for him to prosper or do well in his own career, what he wants to choose. But here I want to be a footballer, and in school I only got 2 general PT periods where you wear white shorts and white shoes and you just go and play whatever you want, and that's all about it in a whole week. And if you want theory classes, there is none. So I was just thinking of maybe a way where you can bring both together, where kids do not have to leave school. Then what footballers did was they left school, and that's not ideal. That's the worst thing. You should be educated. I mean, I always want to learn more.
Sunil, in your case, your dad was a top class footballer, right? He played for the Indian Army. Presumably, you got some coaching at home. I agree. You can't just do everything as add-ons after hours. So in your case, maybe it was. But you're right. I could imagine a situation where kids with genuine sporting talent, as you undoubtedly had, could be put in sports schools where the academic learning is reduced or compressed, and there is as much time given to both the theory and the practice of sports, and particularly the sport you want to play. I'm sure that there are such institutions elsewhere, and at the college level or in a post-school level, there are a few. For example, in my constituency, we have under the Sports Authority of India a National Center for Physical Education. And that center actually offers courses, including theoretical courses, in sports and train sportsmen and athletes. We have grounds for various sports and track field and everything else. But that's only after you left school, by which time you presumably either become good enough at the sport to get into a place like that, or you miss the boat altogether. So you're right. We should have something like this at the school level too. I would agree with you.
All right. So now let's go to the next question. So a preconceived notion about you is big, difficult words, fat books, and political campaigns. Now, if I would like you to go a little bit back and rewind time and give us a peek into Shashi Tharoor's teens. And we are not talking about the books or the paper submissions or doctorates. We would want to know, did he like any particular gig? Was he into adventure sports? Was he a little reckless sometimes? Or all your mischief was always measured? How were you as a young boy?
Not terribly reckless, I must admit. Don't ask me why. I was a bit square, I guess. But my extracurriculars were actually quite a lot. I did a lot of debating, a lot of writing, a lot of speaking and theatre, acting in school and college. So I was never just a
Did you enjoy acting at
very much? In fact, in school in Bombay, in Campion, I'm proud to say the 3 years I competed in the interclass dramatics, as it was called, I won the Best Actor award all 3 years. Then my father got transferred to Calcutta and I went there. We didn't have that kind of theatre in the school. We just had one play a year. It wasn't the same thing. In Bombay, I actually had theatre classes with Pearl Padamsi, the famous actress, conducting those classes. And we did public performances of plays and so on. So I really enjoyed that. My dad hadn't got transferred and we'd stayed in Bombay. I wouldn't be surprised if I had become more serious about acting beyond the point, especially living in Bombay. But I moved on and that was that. Speaking, particularly debating, I started very young. My father initially sort of wrote my speeches and enrolled me in debates, and I had a knack for it. I rather enjoyed it. And then as I grew up, I kept going with debating. And in Calcutta, my school, St. Xavier's, had extempore speaking, where you were given a topic and 5 minutes later you had to make a speech on it. That made you think on your feet and speak well, so that also helped. And in college at St. Stephen's, I did all of those things, and I also have revived the Woodhouse Society, named for P.G. Woodhouse, the humorist, so that we can actually do things like have mimicry competitions and practical joke competitions and that sort of stuff. Had a lot of fun with that too. So I can't say that I was totally lacking in humor, but I'm not sure I did anything totally nuts.
All right, that's well put. All right, so that's our 5 questions finished, and now I've got a small rapid fire.
Okay.
I'm sure I don't have to tell you what rapid fire means, sir. So let's be rapid and fiery.
Okay.
So are you ready?
Yep.
The first one, physical books or the Kindle?
Physical books. I love the feel, the look, the smell, the weight of a book in my hands. I like turning the pages. Physical book, way, way, way ahead.
I know the feeling now. As I said, I've just joined in.
Good,
Second one,
welcome.
sir, Scrabble or a crossword?
Scrabble. Crossword, it's a kind of an insider's game. You've got to get used to a particular kind of clue setting habit. So the New York Times clues are different from the London Times clues, the Times of India's clues. And once you get into the trick of the way in which those clues are set and their conventions, then it becomes an exercise in deciphering. It's like cracking a code. Whereas with Scrabble, there's much more flexibility. There's a random luck of the tiles you draw, which letters you get. There's the opportunities on the board or not. I have a 7-letter word, but I have no place to put it. And somebody else, grabs all the triples while I'm waiting for my 7-letter word, etc. So there's more variance, more ups and downs, more choices, more challenges. I prefer Scrabble.
Third one, the one book you would wrap as a gift to give to anyone?
I think probably the Mahabharata, because it just offers so much. It gives you such a rich cornucopia of stories, but not just not just the central myth that everyone knows about. The Mahabharata is full of digressions, of anecdotes, of lessons, of advice to people, and at the same time, it's very much anchored in the real world. The characters are prone to greed, to lust, to treachery, to violence, to hatred. They're motivated by the same things that people we encounter in our daily lives are motivated by. So I would say the Mahabharata is like combining mythology, history, a novel, a sort of how-to manual, everything in one book. So that's the one that offers the richest range of things for people to have.
So a 2-second break. What cornucopia means, sir? I didn't get the word.
Cornucopia is something that is absolutely full of lots of things. So it's an overflowing bounty inside one particular receptacle. See, at least after all this time, 45 minutes, I haven't used a difficult word, right?
Yeah. And so let me talk to Kunal right now. Kunal, you said sit with a dictionary, and I told you I don't need one because sir is there. So I don't need a dictionary now. All right. So the next one, a language you love to listen to, even if you don't speak or understand it.
Okay, well, a language I love to listen to that I do speak and understand is French. I just love the French language. But a language I like listening to, even when I don't always understand what's in it, is probably Bangla. I understand some, I speak some, but my Bangla is very rudimentary. But, you hear poetry, you hear lyrics, you hear songs, you hear Robindra Sangeet or the songs of D.L. Rai and others. It's such an incredibly melodic language, rich in resonance. My friend Shugata Bose, who was briefly an MP, now a professor again at Harvard, when you hear him speak Bangla or sing Bangla or recite a Bangla poem, you just get the majesty of the language. And I don't say that I understand even 60% of what he's saying or what other Bengali speakers and singers are saying, but I absolutely love the sound of it.
I love the language too. I'm married to a Bong girl.
I know, and I heard the story that she was your coach's daughter.
Yeah. Let's not talk about that.
It's like marrying the boss's daughter in the company.
Yeah, I guilty. I did that, yes. But I think she would take the blame more than half because she was the one who initiated it. So I put the blame on her.
That's the husband's line. I got to speak to her to find out the other side of the story.
But I totally agree. It's a sweet language. I also do not know. I bhalo kore Bangla bolte pari na, but I bhalo kore bujhte pari. So yeah, I'm there. I can understand.
You should be ahead of me since you've got to listen to it at home, especially when she knows food.
Yeah, actually, when that happens, she speaks in Bengali only. Yeah, true. I just figured out that. Yeah. All right, sir. Our next question. P.G. Woodhouse. To be honest, I haven't read any of his book.
Oh, you're
But
missing
I know
out
you're
on
like,
life, guys.
I know, sir. I just started. I'm a rookie. I will get there. Describe the legend in one word or sentence.
Indescribable. No, I mean, the truth is that I would say he is a man who managed to reinvent English humor while at the same time doing it with a very, very inventive use of the English language. So you can really improve your English, not just language, but literature, because of all of his literary allusions in his writing. But at the same time, you have a lot of fun because he's got all these zany plots, madcap characters doing insane things, pinching policemen's helmets on boat race night, being bullied by tyrannical aunts, throwing buns at each other at their club. I mean, the whole thing is, these are these really crazy, irresponsible, wild characters doing all sorts of silly things, but written in an incredibly literate style with a tremendous sense of humor, lots of similes, metaphors, expressions. The language is used so brilliantly that I fell in love with the use of language while at the same time enjoying the humor. It's just the perfect thing. So anybody who says that I really want to read good English prose. I mean, there was a famous writer in the middle of the 20th century called Hilaire Belloc who said the greatest living writer of the English language is P.G. Wodehouse. And people say, well, he's only a humorist. It's like saying that a thriller writer or somebody is such a great writer. Yeah. But honestly, if you read him, you'll understand why. Okay. The music, the music of the language is unbelievable in his hands.
Duly noted. Yes. The next one, sir. Favorite sports and favorite Indian sports person?
Listen, I know the diplomatic thing to do would be to say football and Sunil Chetri, but I'll be honest.
No. You have to be honest, sir, please.
And in football, you're one of the few people I've heard of because I don't watch football. My twin sons, who are your age, make up for it completely. They're the ones who are obsessed with football and they follow football wherever they come to India. They are sitting in a football ground in Kolkata. All that is typical. But when it comes to me, from my childhood, I've been what the Australians call a cricket tragic. I saw my first test match with my father at the age of 7. I was hooked from then onwards. And I have been obsessed with cricket ever since. And that included a period when I was away in countries where no cricket is played. I mean, no serious cricket is played. Posted in Geneva, in Singapore, in New York. And this was the days before the internet, when all you could do was catch the scores, 3 times a day for 1 or 2 brief minutes on BBC Sports Roundup, if you had a shortwave radio and if the reception was not interrupted by too much static. So many people in that situation just gave up their fondness for the game, saying it's impossible to follow it sitting in New York or somewhere. In my case, the keen edge of deprivation simply sharpened my interest. So I would go out of my way to find 3-month-old newspapers, read about test matches long since over. I would follow scores in other countries. I would do all of that stuff. And the result is that I've been able to keep my passion for the game throughout my adult life, throughout my life, really, from the age of 7. And that's my favorite sport. I wouldn't pick one favorite cricketer because I've had so many. And over the years, when you've been watching a sport for over half a century, you have lots of favorites over time in different ways for different times. If you had to ask me to pick 20 favorites, I could more easily than pick one. But there's some great players, and most of them, of course, Indian.
Yeah. So let's say the first Indian cricketer that you really loved and followed. The first one.
The first one when I was very young was a guy called M.L. Jaiswal. He was a very, very interesting player who was attractive and swashbuckling both to look at and when playing. He would tie a handkerchief around his throat like a cravat. He looked like something out of a 16th century pirate scene or something. And he would come in and wield the bat like a rapier, but he could also be very defensive and careful when needed to be. Very attractive cricketer and very attractive person. Then, of course, there was Tiger Pataudi, who lost one eye. Yeah. And despite that, became one of the great batsmen. He would have been far greater, of course, if he'd had both eyes, because as a schoolboy, he broke every single schoolboy cricket record. And then at the age of 20, to lose one eye and have to reinvent the way you stand, the way you play, everything, and still be a good enough player to captain your country. That was amazing. There was an off-spinner called Venkatraghavan. There was an amazing wicketkeeper batsman called Budhi Kundaran. I remember the first match I ever saw, the first day I saw Test cricket. Budhi Kundaran opened the batting for India against England. And he hit, in the first or second over, hit a huge six that landed practically at my feet, right in the ground in front of me. Then a few minutes later, he tried another shot like that. It landed just inside the boundary, so it was a 4. And the third time he tried a big shot, it steepled up into the air, came down, and an English fieldsman caught it while Kundaran was still running. So while running, he threw his bat up into the air. He knew he was out. Continued running, caught the bat as it came down and ran onto the pavilion. I thought, wow. It was like a dose of exhilaration being injected into my veins. And Kundaran is the one with whom I can say I really became hooked on cricket. Amazing player. I would have thrived in the T20 era.
Clearly shows how big a fan you are of cricket, sir.
Totally.
The last one is
I don't know. I mean, first of all, I haven't contemplated writing one just yet.
But you will write someday, isn't it?
Various possibilities. I suppose one would be the man with 2 horoscopes. Because when I was born in London, my Indian parents, of course, carefully noted the time. And they asked an amateur astrologer who was a doctor in London to write a horoscope. And they also sent the details off to the village, my parents, my mother's village. And some local astrologer cast a horoscope there. And the two simply don't match. So rather than choose between them, I said, let's have both and use one. In fact, when I was getting married for the first time, and my intended parents asked for horoscope, the first one didn't match. We said, yeah, try this one. It might be more accurate. So in some ways, it's not an inappropriate metaphor for somebody who's led 2 lives always. I've never been just one thing. Even when I was working at the UN, I was writing on the side. When I was studying, I was writing on the side. When I was in politics, I was writing on the side. So in some ways, I've had 2 destinies laid out for me. One through my words, through my pen, through my voice, and one through my actions, whether in peacekeeping, in refugee work, now in political work. So, there's a major difference between the life of an observer and the life of a doer, an actor. I would say that I've been privileged to have had a chance to do both, where you go from the world of decisions to the world of conclusions. And then you go back to the world of decisions and see if some of your conclusions make sense in the real world. So in some ways, it's been quite interesting to have those 2 lives. The title 2 Lives has already been used up by Vikram Seth in one of his books. Another possibility, I suppose, if I wrote the book very soon, I'd like the title to be continued, because I don't think I've finished yet. But
that's a good one, yeah.
But there you are.
All right. So sir, now we have 5 questions done and the rapid fire done. Can I request you for a 2-minute break? Because what happens is Instagram doesn't allow it after an hour. So can I please get you back in 2 minutes if you do not mind?
Sure. So do we hang up?
Thank you so much. I'll hang up and I'll come back in just a minute and I'll add you in a minute, sir.
Okay. Here we are.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sunil. Good to see you again.
Yeah. So now we're done with 5 questions. Can you honestly tell us, was it a little bit different than what you were asked generally? Please make me happy and say yes.
Yeah, absolutely. No, totally. Your questions are very different on the way you ask them and the way you follow up.
We worked really hard on doing the research, because you have given so many interviews, you've spoken in so many different podiums, and you've spoken so much, and it's so vast. So we really had to find something that could make your time worth, and you could come up with something new. Because even your fans want to know something new, because they have seen so many videos on you, sir.
That's true. That's true, and I didn't want to repeat myself. So I think both of you asked me questions that I haven't usually been asked, and I've given you answers that people haven't usually heard. So that's very good to know. And do you keep a recording of this and put it out there?
Yes, sir. I'll do that.
Excellent.
And I've got so many requests, especially for you, because when I announced that I'm going to get you, that I've succeeded in getting you as a guest, there are so many requests from people that please do record it and give it there. You have no idea how many fans you have, sir.
I'm delighted. I mean, the point is that, there's no real point in either writing or being in politics unless you can make something of an impact on people, on the way they think, on how they feel about certain issues. And so I hope that that I have had that impact, and I would like to continue making that difference for as long as possible. The day I stop making that difference, I'll quietly slip away.
So before I ask you the sixth question, sir, I will tell you why I'm a fan of you, sir, because I'm not into too much of politics. I do not have much knowledge about it. But when I saw, and you also said in this interview that you different stuff, that is exactly how I want to see my life, sir. When as I grow older, I want to acquire as much knowledge as possible, different stuff. So I read a lot about cosmos, about planets. That really excites me. I see a lot of things. I read a lot about animals, and every now and then I try, because a lot of time goes in training and sleeping and recovering and eating. But whatever little time that I get, I try and get something new. It might be very small. It might be about not a world-changing affair, but anything new. And then it just gives you so much excitement. And that's why I'm a big fan of you. And that's why I wanted to bring you in this show, sir.
That's so kind of you. Well, I'm very happy to be in touch with you. You were just a name for me, and a famous name at that. But it's now good to link it to your face, your conversation. I hope we can stay in touch. You've really achieved a remarkable amount. I think everything that I knew about you was that the entire rise of Indian football in the last 10 years, you get the lion's share of the credit. Your own performance and your own leadership have made all the difference. So it's great to see that, Sunil. And I'm very, very pleased to be part of your conversation.
Thank you, sir. So let's jump into the sixth question.
Great.
I'm aware that you were asthmatic as a child.
Yeah.
That quickly translated into you spending a lot of time indoors reading. Now, do you think life would have been a different one if, let's suppose, you were spending all your waking time on a ground as I did? Or do you think that little problem is the reason why you have a love affair with literature?
No, I think that's a very fair question, because something as fundamental, as serious and almost crippling asthma does affect your life choices. I was, as I said, nuts about cricket. And as a very small kid, I had an early talent for the game. I was a pretty decent batsman. In fact, in class 3, I was captain of the class team. And, in those days, every class had a team. By class 4, I was vice captain. By class 5, I was in the reserves, because as the other kids healthy and grew, I was more and more sickly and not keeping up physically with the others. And that was sad for me. So if I didn't have asthma, who knows? I might have become much more of an all-round person, and perhaps even been a fairly decent sportsman. Bombay was, after all, the crucible of cricket. I'm not suggesting that I ever had the talent to be one of the great Bombay names, but I would probably have, done more of that sort of thing. But I didn't have a choice. I was not well enough to even go downstairs and run around with the other kids. So I was just essentially sitting in my parents' apartment, often in bed. There was no TV, needless to say, in my boyhood, or computers or Nintendo or handheld games or mobile phones. So I only had books, and books were my escape, books were my entertainment, books were my education. So yeah, my fondness for books was perhaps shaped by that experience. But there must be many asthmatic children who never enjoyed reading. So it did help that I had some inclination to that too.
That's nice. Do you, I mean, just to add to the question, do you feel at those times that you're missing out in playing outside, or did you quickly tell yourself that it's okay, this is what I have, and I'll do what I like here, and I'll make do of whatever the kind of situation that I'm thrown in? Or were you like really mad that you can't go out and play, as a lot of kids want when they're young?
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty unhappy about that. But when you realize that you have no choice, you eventually have to adjust, and that's essentially what I did. I adjusted. I won't say that I was rebelling against it, because fortunately I really enjoyed books, and they transported me to another world. They transported me to all sorts of other experiences. I was a great fan of fiction as a child. I read lots and lots of adventures. Enid Blyton's books, which were really very imaginative. the wartime adventures of Biggles and the Biggles books, the humorous boarding school adventures of Billy Bunter. There were various kinds of English language books. And so I found myself, of course, running out of things to read also. And then what did I do? Again, I was so sick to, so I would actually end up writing. And my first attempts at writing around age 6 were really writing things very imitative of what these other things did. In other words, that if Enid Blyton had these famous 5 and Secret 7 and so on, I invented the 6 solvers, who were Indian kids having similar adventures by visiting an Indian village, rather like the English villages in a story. So that kind of thing was, very derivative and imitative. But at the same time, it was a way I taught myself to write as well, because my father would get the stories typed up so I could share them with friends, and they had to be interesting enough to be read. And that's how my whole literary work began.
Do you have them copies by any chance?
Of those stories?
Yeah.
No, I'm so sad to say that though my parents preserved them for many, many years, and I had them with me in New York, they got lost between New York and coming back to India. An entire trunk of papers seems to have been mislaid or thrown away by in the course of that move, and I am sorry to say it's gone forever. In fact, there was a publisher who decided they wanted to publish these children. So I said, they're not good enough. They said, no, we want to publish them as the writings of a child. So I said, if you can find them amongst all the papers that survived the journey from New York in the storeroom, you're welcome. They came and looked, and it wasn't there, and I knew it wasn't going to be there because, anyway, long and complicated saga, but I'm afraid that's that. So all one has is some memories of the 6 solvers. The Biggles stories were published in the Junior Statesman. They weren't. My imitation of Biggles was an Anglo-Indian fighter pilot called Bellows. So it was called Operation Bellows, and the Junior Statesman published it when I was 10 years old. So those are in print, and somebody can still find them in the archives. And a lot of my other stories were published in various Indian magazines. In fact, until there was a big explosion in Indian magazine publishing after the emergency, I think up to the emergency, I would say that I had probably published in every single English language magazine in India. From Chandamama to Eve's Weekly, I had something or the other published everywhere.
That's amazing. The Great Indian Novel is what I thought was your first writing, but here it goes long back.
The Great Indian Novel was my first novel. It was published when I was 33, written over a year and a half, between about 30 and a half to about 32. The thing is that I think when I turned 30, I had a kind of epiphany. I had this feeling that, my gosh, my life, I've achieved nothing till now. What am I doing? I'm 30. At that point, 30 seemed a huge burden, a huge milestone. So I vowed to at least try and put my writing time. I was writing articles for magazines or newspapers that have been thrown away with the next day's Raddi, So I said, let me try and do something more lasting. Let me write a book. And that's how I began when I was 30. So that, I think, had a psychological impact. I don't think 40 had quite the same sort of impact. 50 did, and 60 certainly did. But the biggest milestone of my rather hardworking young years was 30. That's when I really felt I had to do something. I'm getting too old. Now, you are in a profession which is rather similar, because sportsmen, once they hit 30, are already past their most productive years. You had some very good years between 30 and 35, haven't you?
I would say it has changed a little bit. But yes, a sports person's years are numbered. I would say 10 years back, generally, if you are 30, you are very close to retirement.
Yeah.
But now there are a lot of sports personalities who are doing really well till 35, 40. But
what's the reason for that?
There are a lot of reasons, sir. One is reflexes. One is your body. Because at top level, there is a lot that your body demands. And your recovery gets slower when you're growing older. You become, to be honest. Yeah.
My question is, what is the reason why these days people are able to play longer?
A lot of knowledge about food, a lot of knowledge about rest, the sports science improving vastly. And it just, I think understanding side, just the knowledge. I think when I speak, because I have played along with a lot of seniors who retired early on, I know the kind of talent they were, but just the mindset and the knowledge about food and recovery, the physio, the sports science wasn't there. So now I understand, because I started then, I was a young rookie then, and now they call me fossil ancient. Whatever I know the reason why there is more years onto a sports personality, and not only in our country but worldwide. You can see, because there's so much knowledge and information, and it's handy because when you can take them and work on your body, you will play for a longer time.
Great, good for you. And so we certainly hope to see you around for a while longer.
Thank you.
Even though you're playing in the ISL for Bangalore and not for a Kerala team. Nonetheless, I shall wish you well.
Thank you. So the next question, sir. What was the biggest learning for all the time in the UN? Now, it can be an anecdote or something special somebody told you or something you figured out over all the years. But what was that learning that that really stayed with you, or something that was very, yeah.
Well, one learning early on in my career with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees was that when your work is able to help real human beings, that really there's nothing like it. So, I mean, I remember, for example, when I was in Singapore heading the small office there at the peak of the Vietnamese boat people crisis, and these people were fleeing communism in Vietnam, coming out in small boats, and they were being rescued on the high seas and brought into the port of Singapore, where the country is. Now, I did that for about 3 years, but there were so many incidents. As one, for example, where a young family left Vietnam in a tiny boat with a cannibalized tractor engine to power it. Sure enough, the engine conked out on the high seas there on the South China Sea, and the boat started drifting aimlessly in the winds. They ran out of food, they ran out of drinking water. And here they were in this boat, unable to eat or drink because you can't drink seawater. And they had two small infants, a child of about 1.5 and a baby with them. Now, how will those babies survive? They can't live on rainwater and hope as the adults were trying to do. So the parents slit their fingers and made the babies suck their own blood to give them some nourishment to keep them alive. And when they were eventually rescued by an American ship, as it turned out, they were so weak they couldn't even sit up in the boat. They had to be bodily lifted up. When that ship came in, my staff and I broke every rule in the book and rushed them to intensive care. And then to see that same family a few months later, healthy and well-fed and well-dressed, and heading off for new lives in the US.
All of them survived?
They all survived. They all survived, and God knows today they're growing up well and healthy in America, because I'm talking about 1981, 82. So this is 38 years ago, the story. Those infants are now adults, probably with kids of their own. And the truth is that these kinds of things, it gave you satisfaction few other jobs could, and also taught you that, that putting your head to the pillow at night, knowing the things you had done during the day had made a real fundamental difference to human beings' lives, that satisfaction exceeds any other satisfaction of any other profession. So sometimes I've been tempted to chuck it all and go off and just be a full-time writer. I wonder how much my writing can change lives that, for example, I'm able to impact through my work, whether at the UN, whether in politics, because the decisions I can move and so on can actually affect real human beings, people I can meet and see, and not abstractions at the end of a printed page.
True. That's nice. That's a very heartening story. Was that the reason also that when you came from UN after 29 years, that you took the plunge of getting into politics? Was that one of the reasons also?
Yeah, I hesitated for about a year. I actually was going in and out of India from New York, trying to figure out for myself what I wanted to do. I was briefly a consultant for a company based in Dubai, and the money was good, But I'd realized that money had never been a motivation for me all my life, and it was too late to change. I really, so I would, on my visits to India, I would of course meet politicians, government people. I had met all of them as a UN official, because when you are working as the senior Indian at the UN, any senior Indian dignitary coming from India is introduced to you. So I had met them all. And in some cases, I had established a bit of a connection with them, and I would, out of sheer courtesy, come and call on them whenever I came to Delhi on vacations and so on. So I had that link. And I would say that the ability to be able to maintain that link may have helped explain why one day the Congress Party turned to me and said, would you like to contest? And at that point, it was very clear to me that I was not going to be half as satisfied with what I was doing as I would be by getting into politics. And I decided to give it a shot. There was no Rajya Sabha seat on offer, none available. I had to do it the hard way. And I thought precisely because I was coming from a long adult life abroad in a different profession, I needed the credibility that would come from fighting an election and ideally winning it. And that's what I did, and it worked. I not only won that election, but two more. And in a little over a month's time, I will become the longest serving MP ever for Thiruvananthapuram, which is something that, that I'm really, really excited about.
Congratulations for that, sir.
Well, it hasn't happened yet, 2-3 weeks to go, but yeah, I'm quite excited about that, because the Kerala voter is a demanding voter, and very often re-election doesn't happen because of that. So to be re-elected this many times in Trivandrum has been a real bonus.
All right, on to our next one then. So you have authored close to 24 books now already, if I'm not wrong.
20 books.
Yeah.
But two more on the way this year. So your statement isn't too far off.
Yeah. So I do not know the nitty-gritties of publishing a book, but I do know it involves a bunch of editors. So what is the conversation like when the editing scissors are pulled out on lines or words that you felt are completely necessary? Or does it, or is it something else? Like you give them and it's published. There's no checking. Is Mr. Tharoor's?
There has to be checking, but at the same time, they cut me a lot of slack, Sunil. So I would say that number one, the editors don't find too much of that kind of thing to do with my work. Where I agree with their suggestions, I'm happy to do it. Where I disagree, they usually surrender to my disagreement. So it's a fairly balanced relationship. There's one editor in India whom I greatly respect, and that's my current editor at Aleph, who used to be my editor at Penguin, David Davidar. David is somebody who's a writer himself, and his judgment is often very good. And if he says, you know, this is repetitive, or I think you should cut this down, or you might want to think of moving this somewhere else, or you might not want to make this argument here, whatever, I take him seriously and I look at it in that spirit. I'm currently writing a book on nationalism, where for the first time, and I've never done this with any of my 20 books, I decided that I wanted to send this out to 4 scholars I knew and respected around the world as a draft to get their suggestions on what needed improvement. And it turned out to be an incredibly useful exercise, because it wasn't editorial stuff particularly, though one of the points, one of the scholars, in addition to the 4 professors in this field, I also turned to a scholar who's my niece. She's actually a scholar of literature and rhetoric, not of politics, but she had understood and read a lot of the theory about nationalism and everything else. So she did quibble about certain specific words, being a literature professor. The others were more giving me substantive things and guiding me to additional reading and additional reference material. Because I felt that when you're writing a book about something like nationalism, which I'm writing for ordinary readers, I hope that it's a book you will read, Sunil, people who read op-eds and newspapers will read. But at the same time, it's got to stand up to the scrutiny of those who are spending all their time studying academically a subject like nationalism, teaching it, and so on. They can't tell you, listen, this is completely out of date, or you've missed all the new research and new theories about this or that. So you have to write for a general readership, like a newspaper readership, while at the same time you can't be off academically with the scholars. And that's why in this particular book, I have also sent out the manuscript to scholars. And so in a sense, the final product will benefit not just from editing, but even from the expertise and inputs of others who have worked in these fields. And that I'm very happy to talk about publicly, and I will acknowledge them in the book, because I think one is enriched always by this kind of intellectual exchange. But ultimately what I write is my view, and it's my point of view and my argument, and I stand by my own conclusions.
So the next time, just for fun's sake, when you're writing a next book or something, you should make some spelling errors and grammatical errors and give it to the editor. I bet the person will not come back to you saying, "So it's your mistake."
No, but you know, there are two kinds of editing. There is that sort of substantive editing, language, everything else, and then there's what's called copy editing. Copy editing is quite interesting, where it's a purely mechanical process. But for example, when I wrote fiction, I published novels and so on. One of the most hilarious copy-edit questions I got from a copy editor and my either British or American publisher was something along the lines of, does on page 283 sync with on page 147, and is it the same as on page 190? So that kind of thing happens in the copy editing stage. So it was quite funny, because I think, in fact, two of the three were meant to be different sounds. One was meant to be a and the other was meant to be a but the third one should not have been spelled differently. So there you are, the copy editor does a useful job too.
All right.
We'll have to have one last question, then I have to leave you, because I'm locked down with my mother and sister.
Yeah, sir. This is the last question, sir. This is the last question, sir.
Right.
So three influencers / heroes, people that you have never met, but have influenced you, taught you in a massive way. A small request, you got to elaborate me, who do you choose and why do you choose them?
Yeah, I mean, amongst people who've influenced me, certainly Jawaharlal Nehru is one person I've never met who influenced me enormously, both by the example of his life and by his mind. You know, I've written a short biography of Nehru, and I found in reading up his speeches, his own writings, his letters and correspondence, going back to his childhood, his letters to his father, all of that, I really felt with Jawaharlal Nehru that I had a human being who was admirable in every respect. He had an extraordinary mind, a big heart, a great vision, great love of the country and passion and commitment to the country. And at the same time, I never saw the charisma that so many people who were his contemporaries talked about. He was a big favorite of audiences. People thronged to see him in large numbers. Women in particular loved him. All that you don't see. You just see the words he speaks, and sometimes you can hear recordings of the way he spoke. But he sounds absolutely fabulous. I'm told that he was also, until he became a bit over the last decade of his life, he was a bit more withdrawn. But earlier, he was apparently a great conversationalist at the dining table and so on, a very witty and humorous and engaging person. So I would love to have met him at that stage. It was before I was born, of course. So that's one person I definitely influenced me a great deal. I think P.G. Woodhouse influenced me by his influenced my love of language. You know, I first came across Woodhouse. I'd never heard of him, and an otherwise repellent English teacher giving oral dictation. I don't know, in your time in school there was oral dictation.
There was right when I was young. Yeah.
The students have to write it out and check for your spelling mistakes.
Yeah.
So he read out a passage of oral dictation from a book of Woodhouse's. And I was writing and chortling at the same time, laughing away. And at the end of the period, I went to the teacher and said, "Excuse me, sir," or father, he was a priest. "Excuse me, father, what exactly was that book you read this passage from?" And he told me, and I promptly went to the library and borrowed it, because there's something so almost unreal about his life. So I think when you say I'd like to meet him, I probably just like to sit in awestruck silence and just watch him and listen to him.
Yeah,
I'm not sure that I could interview him like a journalist or approach him that way, because he seems, to our generation, and yours is perhaps even one step further removed, as someone almost out of the pages of a textbook rather than real life. There are a lot of others. Dr. Ambedkar inspires me tremendously. I've read his speeches. He's somebody I'd love to cross swords with. He seemed to be an argumentative Indian, somebody with ideas who wasn't scared of crossing swords and disagreeing. He'd be an enjoyable person to meet. I certainly would probably have hated meeting, but enjoyed arguing with Winston Churchill, because he epitomized everything that's horrible and evil about British colonialism and imperialism to me. So there's no shortage of people like that around the world. But the three that I named first are the ones who I would truly call inspiring figures, from those I've never met. Now, there are people I've met who inspired me. My own father was my great hero. And then there is Kofi Annan, my late boss at the UN, who was a very, very major influence, and not least on how he managed the pressures on himself, as well as the way he dealt with people. I learned a lot from that. But
that's lovely.
He didn't fit into your answer because you said it has to be somebody you never met. So I worked closely.
But even the three, So thank you so much for your time, sir. I know you're running late for something.
Thank you, Sunil.
I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Please keep acquiring knowledge and distributing to us. Please stay healthy. Please keep working hard, sir, because you're enjoying it. And I just hope you're always healthy, you're always happy, and see you soon, sir.
Thank you, Sunil. Thank you for a very engaging conversation. And thank you for having raised my street cred with my football-loving sons. They'll think if Sunil Chetri finds Dad worth talking to, he can't be all bad. So that's great to hear. Thanks so much, Sunil. All the best.
Thanks a lot, sir. Have a good night.
Send us a link to the full recording.
I will do that, sir. I will do that. I will definitely do that.
Take care and good luck
to
to you. Stay safe, stay well, and score more goals.
Thank you so much. I'll do that, sir. Thank you so much.